Unit 20, Respiration, Part C. Now let's continue to Part C, the mechanics of breathing. Here we'll have a little background. We'll look at resistance, Boyle's law, inspiration and expiration, and briefly at lung capacities. In breathing, air passes through the respiratory passageways to and from the lungs. Two factors influence the flow of air: resistance and pressure differences. Now, doesn't this sound familiar? We used these two factors when we discussed functioning of the cardiovascular system. Increased resistance decreases flow, and decreased resistance increases flow. The greater the pressure difference, the greater the flow of air. The less the pressure difference, the less the flow of air. To increase resistance, in the trachea, bronchi, and bronchioles, smooth muscles contract. Factors that do that include histamine, parasympathetic nervous system, decreased carbon dioxide. When they contract, it pulls the ends of the cartilage together and decreases the diameter of the passageway. The tube constricts, resistance increases. The bronchioles, however, lack cartilage, but the surrounding smooth muscle will constrict the tubes. The bronchioles are the most important in regulating resistance due to the large number and small size. To decrease resistance, the trachea, bronchi, and bronchioles smooth muscle relaxes. Factors causing that would be epinephrine, sympathetic nervous system, and increased carbon dioxide. In both cases, the role of carbon dioxide is less important. Cartilage of the trachea, when the muscles relax, spring apart. The tubes dilate and resistance decreases. The bronchioles lack cartilage, but surrounding elastic tissue pulls it to dilate them. Let's look at Boyle's law. In a closed container filled with a gas, pressure is inversely proportional to volume. Here's a container. Let's say the volume in this container is 1 and the pressure is 1. It doesn't matter what units we're using. It could be pounds per square inch or whatever. The container to the right, the volume has been decreased by 1/2, but the pressure has been doubled. How many particles are in the left container? 13. How many are in the right container? 13, the same particles. In a closed container filled with a gas, as we said, pressure is inversely proportional to volume. The left container, 13 particles are in it. The right container, also 13. Notice that no air is allowed into or out of the container. The molecules have simply been pushed closer together. Molecules are in constant motion. They're bumping into the walls of the container, creating pressure. In the container on the right, it still has the same number of molecules bumping into the wall, but it only has 1/2 of the wall space. Now, this concept may not be intuitive because you think of blowing air into a balloon and making it bigger. But when you do that, you're adding molecules to the air in the balloon. Boyle's law refers to a container in which you do not add or remove molecules. If the volumes are contained in two, one inside the other, Boyle's law still applies. Consider this. Here we have two circular elastic containers, both spheres. There's the outer sphere, and inside that is the inner sphere. The initial pressure in both is the same. If the volume in the outer sphere increases, according to Boyle's law, its pressure will decrease. This will result in a difference in pressure between the outer and the inner sphere. Pressure difference will cause the wall of the inner sphere to move out. It's being forced by the greater pressure. This causes the volume in the inner sphere to increase. And according to Boyle's law, when the pressure increases, when the volume increases, the pressure in the inner sphere will decrease. So, an increase in the volume of the outer sphere results in a decrease in the pressure of the inner sphere. Now, let's come back to the view of the chest and look at a little more detail of inspiration and expiration. Breathing may be quiet or forced. In quiet breathing, the inspiratory muscles only are used, so they contract. For expiration, the expiratory and inspiratory muscles simply relax. In forced breathing, on the other hand, inspiratory and expiratory muscles are involved. For inspiration, the inspiratory muscles are contracted, the expiratory muscles are relaxed. For expiration, the expiratory muscles contract and the inspiratory muscles relax. But that's pretty easy to demonstrate. While you're watching this video, just relax a moment. Inhale and relax. And you exhale without force. Inhale, relax. But let's try forced breathing. Inhale and blow air out. Inhale, exhale. Types of breathing include costal breathing using the intercostal muscles only, and diaphragmatic breathing using the diaphragm and the abdominal wall muscles only. This is also easy to demonstrate. Try holding your tummy still and inhale and exhale. Your chest rises and falls. Try, on the other hand, to hold your chest still and use just your diaphragm muscles and the abdominal wall muscles. Your tummy goes in and out. Now that we've completed the background, we can see how we inhale and exhale. This is a view of the thorax and a view of the lung at rest. The enlargement of the wall shows the thoracic wall in the heavy line and the lung wall. Again, notice we put that phrase in quotes because the lung is not built just like a balloon. The pleural cavity is the space between the two. The pressure in the thoracic cavity between the thoracic wall and the lung wall, and that's the same as the pleural cavity, it's called the pleural pressure. It's also referred to as the intrapleural pressure. Pressure in the lung is the intrapulmonary pressure. I prefer to use these phrases because it leads to less confusion. If I say pleural pressure, you're not confused with intrapulmonary pressure. Whereas if I used intrapleural and intrapulmonary, you'd have to think momentarily, now which is which? Pressures are measured in millimeters of mercury. Air pressure at sea level, this includes inside the lungs, is 760 millimeters of mercury. At rest, the pleural pressure is 756, but there's lung elasticity to consider. Both of those push inward and equal the intrapulmonary pressure of 760, pushing outward. So 756 plus lung elasticity equals 760. Let's look at how some of the muscles work. Take the external intercostals. When they contract, the ribs are raised and the sternum moves outward. When the internal intercostals contract, the ribs are lowered and the sternum moves back toward the chest. Here's a table showing the steps involved in breathing. Now, this is quite a bit artificial because you don't really do it step by step. It's all one continuous motion. This will help you understand certain things. The external intercostal muscles will contract, and when they do that, they raise the ribs. They increase the front to back dimension of the thoracic cavity. At the same time, the diaphragm contracts to lower the diaphragm. So step one, the chest wall and diaphragm move out and down. This increases the top-bottom dimension of the thoracic cavity. The result is an increase in pleural volume or thoracic volume. Remember Boyle's law. If the pleural volume increases, the pleural pressure will decrease. Now notice the one in parentheses. We'll come back to that shortly. The lungs will expand due to the difference in pressure. Remember the two spheres that we just described. The lung volume increases and the intrapulmonary pressure decreases. Boyle's law. Air moves into the lungs from high pressure outside of the lungs to low pressure inside the lungs. To exhale, we use the expiratory muscles. The internal intercostal muscles contract to lower the ribs. They decrease the top front to back dimension of the thoracic cavity. The abdominal wall muscles contract to compress the abdomen, to push the diaphragm up, and decrease the top to bottom dimension of the thoracic cavity. So step one is the chest wall and diaphragm move in and up. This decreases the pleural or thoracic volume. If the pleural volume decreases, the pleural pressure increases. Boyle's law. The lungs deflate due to the difference in pressure, and the lung volume decreases. The intrapulmonary pressure increases. Boyle's law again, and the difference in pressure, higher inside the lungs compared to outside, causes air to move from high to low, that is, out of the lungs. Now, you remember on several occasions we mentioned the so-called respiratory pump. We mentioned this when we were talking about cardiovascular function. And I said several times that we won't explain it until we get to the respiratory system. Well, we're there now. Inspiration involves a decrease in pleural pressure. That's indicated by number 1. Now, the increase in pressure difference from the body to the thorax, resulting from a decrease in pleural pressure, this includes everything in the chest, including blood vessels and heart. When that happens, it increases blood flow in the systemic veins into the chest and into the heart. Remember, the greater the difference in pressure, the greater the flow. So the act of inspiration has lowered the pressure inside the chest compared to the pressure outside of the chest. Inspiration also involves an increase in lung volume, number 2, including everything in the lungs. An increase in lung volume leads to an increase in the diameter of vessels within the lungs. The increased diameter of the vessels decreases resistance to blood flow in those vessels in the lungs. blood flows toward least resistance. So it increases blood flow from heart to lungs in the pulmonary artery. Expiration involves an increase in pleural pressure, number 3. That includes everything in the chest. This increases the pressure difference from the thorax, including the heart, to the body outside of the thorax. So this increases blood flow from heart into the systemic arteries. Expiration also involves a decrease in lung volume, number 4, including everything within the lungs. Decrease in lung volume leads to a decrease in vessel diameter within the lungs. The decreased diameter of vessels increases pressure of blood in the lungs. Blood flows toward lower pressure, so this increases blood flow from lungs to heart in the pulmonary veins. So you see, the very act of breathing promotes blood flow. When you inhale, it promotes flow from the body into the chest and from the chest into the heart, into the lungs. When you exhale, it promotes blood flow from the lungs to the heart and from the chest out. Let's look at lung capacities. The total lung capacity is around 5,800 cc's, cubic centimeters. There is a residual volume of roughly 1,200 cc's, which is the air never exhaled, no matter how hard one might try. Forensic people can determine whether a mammal died before or after birth by taking a section of the lung and placing it in water. If it sinks, death occurred before birth because the animal did not inhale. If it floats, the animal died after birth because the section tended to float. The vital capacity is 4,600 cc's. This is the air that can be inhaled and exhaled. Of that, there is a tidal volume of 500 cc's, which is the air inhaled and exhaled at rest. That's probably what you're doing right now. The reserve volume of 4,800 cc's is the additional air that can be inhaled or exhaled. The inspiratory reserve amounts to about 3,000 cc's, and the expiratory reserve around about 1,100 cc's. You're now ready to continue with Part D, transport of gases.